What are you going to do about the fact that I have to line up for 3 weeks to go rent in Abbotsbury? Or I have to go and take out a credit card loan to fill up my tank with petrol?
I likely would have the balance of power and I'd pick up that final seat. I feel sorry for people with the pronouns in the bios, and it's really very simple. If someone's naked or if there's sexual content, it doesn't belong on a public wall. It doesn't belong on someone's body in a pride march.
Isn't that just the nature of creativity, that you have to push the envelope?
What you're really targeting are the eyes of children. And if we were really going to have a sincere discussion about climate change, it would make sense to look at nuclear. Even if I were vaccinated, I would have put my foot down and said, no, you will not get rid of our staff. No, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth that, there are vaccinated nurses standing out the front protesting about their wages, instead of standing out the front protesting about their wages, their overtime, and the fact that their colleagues can't come back to work.
What do Aunt Gracie, vapes, and a phone all have in common? They all die eventually. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about Gracie or your vapes. But what I can do is help you out with your phones. My friends over at Ampere have helped us out here. You see, Ampere have an amazing range of wireless chargers that slip right into your pocket and just stick to your phone. They're completely magnetic, you forget they're there half the time, and before you know it, your phone's fully charged again. So no more stressing on when you're out clubbing, no more worrying about when you need to book a table, no more worrying when you're trying to pick up from Moe. All you have to do is go to ampere.com, use promo code Luca, you get a sweet discount, and enjoy endless wireless charging.
So, we're talking a little bit behind cameras, but I am genuinely curious to know, I find it really interesting with you whenever you do interviews that people, when they introduce you or when they try and frame you in a way that people understand, they tend to go straight to your parents, they tend to go straight to your childhood, they kind of go to the way you grew up. But I feel like there's a lot more of a dynamic range about you. You've got a very sharp, witty sense of humor. You're very politically aligned. You've got, strong viewpoints. And you just do a plethora of things. So my question to you essentially to start this thing off is how do you define yourself? When people ask, who are you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Well, wow, thanks for all the compliments in one go. How overwhelming. First and foremost, I'd say I identify as hilarious. So I'm just mostly a meme artist.
How did you put it before? A certified shit poster or something like that?
A resident shit poster.
Resident shit poster.
No, look, I guess you're right. I do wear a lot of different hats. And so, look, it really depends on the context of whatever we're talking about. I mean, a lot of people know me from more of my activism, freedom fighting, all of that sort of jazz. And then there's a whole other section of society that knows me from my gay marriage activism. So, I guess I'm a political commentator, an activist.
How do you become an activist? Is there a course you have to go through? Can you go to UNSW political activism?
I mean, I wouldn't. I think professionally annoying. No, look, I think you just sort of study the art in any given sense. So, something bothers you in the world, you look at it. If it's a political thing, you read up on the policy surrounding it, and then you just go, all right, I'm going to whinge about this in a few different ways and see what lands. And, you sort of gather people around you when you start to talk up about a lot of these causes, and in particular when you know exactly what's going on, how it works and how to stop it. So I wouldn't say there's any prerequisite in terms of intelligence or education or whatever else to be an activist. It's just being irritated by something and finding a creative way to get past it.
Yeah, and I think the methodology in your activism is very interesting, because I think for most people, the way they associate activism is kind of like the environmentalists that will, or the climate change activists that will go and shut down Sydney Harbour Bridge or tie themselves to trees, or will kind of create a public nuisance in a way to get all this attention. I mean, the top of the heap is Greta Thunberg, right? Greta Thunberg is this 14-year-old girl. She's got something's going on, and she has very strong opinions, which, when you catch them in those 15-second sound bites are really compelling, and they put motivational music behind it, and it's it's very dramatized and very well spread across the media. Like there's clearly an interest in getting Greta as much limelight as possible. But then you see at the same time, a lot of it is staged. A lot of it is set up with camera crews. Like there was a video that came out from her. I believe she was in, I can't remember which country she was in, but she was in a certain country and they had her getting arrested. But they clearly had cameras set up beforehand. She was laughing with the police officers. Like it was almost like you're watching a reality TV show. So like where does activism stem from, and at what point does it really like become just a show, just something that you're trying to manipulate content to get a certain reaction out of people? Like how do people differentiate that, okay, this person's genuinely got an interest, genuinely has research, genuinely has grounds and policies that they're trying to change, and this other person is just looking to stir up attention?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Greta Thunberg really missed her calling in anti-age serum advertisements. Look, she's been immortalised. She's been immortalised as a 12-year-old permanently. I'm pretty sure she's 18.
Right.
But the world is a stage, man. That's basically the way that I see it. Mm-hmm. These climate activists in particular, they just want to stir up the attention for their own self-validation and self-esteem. They're not educated on climate change. They believe in it. I certainly don't, but they can't provide me or anyone else with the science behind their points. So, that's where most people lose me. But then, it's like this virtue signalling mentality where they'll go and block off a road of traffic, not explain entirely what they want, and then just stream it on social media and call it a day. So yeah, I would say it's very intellectually dishonest. Performative comes to mind as well. And, we're just very different people when you look at, say, the anti-lockdown protesters versus the climate change protesters. I mean, one really, was an immediate threat. The lockdowns were really, really hard on people. People lost jobs, they had suicidal teenagers, you name it. And so people were actually out there for a purpose, and the objectives were very clearly defined. But you don't really see that with the climate change protesters. We hate coal, okay.
Yeah.
It's steam coming out of the pipes.
I find that interesting though. So you don't necessarily buy into the climate change agenda that's clearly been pushed over the last 5 years.
No, I mean, if you remember back in the day, it used to be global warming. Mm-hmm. They had to do a rebrand because every summer just started getting cooler. So, back in the Y2K days, people were telling us we were going to face an ice age before they were ever going to say that, the temperature is going to go too high on the planet. It just wasn't a thing. And so, the fear-mongering was there, even with the bushfires. It's climate change, it's this and that, it's global warming. But, anyone who's grown up in the country or understands how things work knows that a lot of these fires that have happened, it's a lot of, a result of a lack of backburning, because these trees do naturally need to regenerate, and that's how the forests rejuvenate themselves. There is a natural cycle of which there are fire seasons and so on and so forth. So I feel like it's almost the media's reacted to a bunch of, natural disasters, tried to blanket it as a global temperature problem. Mm-hmm. And it's just completely out of control, and it's just not based in any real science from what I can see.
But wouldn't you say that the majority of scientists, to a certain extent, would say that by emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you're creating essentially a greenhouse effect in which the globe is warming, and that's causing ice caps to melt? Like, that's generally speaking the party lines that we hear over and over again.
I mean, there was a really funny segment on Q&A a little while ago where Alan Jones turned around to one of these climate alarmists and said, how much carbon dioxide is there? How many emissions are there? What are the figures? And he was like, Australia's output on something is like 0.04%. And, just comparatively to other countries, we're just nothing in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. But, look, the glacier thing's pretty funny too. I actually punched on with some lefties on a thread really recently. So, there was this doomsday, the glaciers are melting in Antarctica, the world's going to, be under the sea and whatever. And I sort of looked at it and I went, hang on a second. Like last I checked Antarctica, not all of it's a landmass and heaps of it is actually ice that goes far into the water. And so I had a look at that and I'm like, these guys don't understand density and, you know, water and the principles of how it rises and falls. And I looked at it and I go, cool, you guys ever put an ice cube in a glass? What happens when it melts? Does the water level go higher? The same? What does it do?
No, it just maintains the same volume.
Literally, because the weight has already compensated. You know, it is going to stay at that same level. And so when I look at that and I go, these glaciers are largely underwater. It's been compensated for. They're not all just hanging off the land and calling it a day. They've long since submerged. And so where I could see maybe there would be a fluctuation in sea levels, it doesn't actually check out scientifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you break it down to basic principles like that, yeah, for sure, that makes sense. But as a general consensus, would you say confidently that reducing our carbon emissions is a good thing?
I just see it as so irrelevant.
Right.
I mean, the trees eat it, for one, you know. Creates the oxygen, doesn't it? So I just look at it and I go, I'm not seeing the hardcore evidence that it's really doing anything. I think, you know, the climate and everything else has quite a natural fluctuation. And I haven't seen anything to indicate that we're not just going through normal seasons of change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, you do touch on an interesting point there, because when you do look at just the stark temperature changes over a long-term scale, right, when you look over thousands of years of human history, and they're able to date back temperature now, I believe through carbon dating, but don't quote me on that because I'm not a scientist. It does show that there is no real pattern or there's no real trend. It does fluctuate, you know, in the most vast degrees possible. We as a planet have gone through very dramatic ice ages and then very dramatic droughts and meteor impacts and earthquakes. Like it's just the Wild West out there. So my gut feeling would say that, you know, over the past 100 years, we've just had a really good run. We've just had an amazing run, and the climate has been able to sustain life in a very comfortable way for most people. And now that things are changing, things are shifting, the question is, well, what do we do with those shifts? How do we strategize for those changes? And I don't see politicians necessarily taking those steps. They kind of restate the party lines over and over again. We need to hit net zero by 2050. We need to do these things. We need to get rid of carbon completely. We need to go completely solar. And, you know, there are so many solutions outside of solar or hydroelectricity that aren't being discussed. Like one of the biggest ones that I think could solve a lot of our issues is nuclear. And people don't want to touch nuclear because it's a scary word, because Putin has nukes, because of Hiroshima or because of Chernobyl. And, you know, I understand those concerns, but it does strike me as a topic of conversation that we really should be addressing if we are going to talk about climate and if we are going to talk about energy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when I think about nuclear, I just think about Mr. Burns. In The Simpsons. That's what comes to mind for me. I'm like, well, okay, that guy. No, I think, you know, you're spot on there. There's a lot of whinging about this problem, but not any real practical solution being put forward. You know, there are huge problems with solar energy. 20 years and that entire battery is just dead. You know, there have been battery fires overseas in Korea, and it's put toxic emissions. People have had to be evacuated from their homes over these mega batteries. Not too long ago, Victoria, Geelong, there was a Tesla mega battery that caught fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, you know, it's just so impractical, especially when you look at places like the Hunter Valley where you go, okay, like, what do you want to do? Like, get rid of all the coal and put like a Duracell battery in the field or something? Like, what's your plan? Because it's not going to last long term. It's going to lose people their jobs and their livelihoods. And I just don't think that it's based in any real common sense principle. And on top of that, like you said, we have really rich reserves of uranium that are not being utilised. And I don't think that we're necessarily marketing them very well for profit in ways that we could because I know we export quite a fair bit of it as well. So it's just, there's so many things going on, in particular with the Australian government, that just don't make any sense. And if we were really going to have a sincere discussion about climate change and, you know, cleaning up the environment, it would make sense to look at nuclear, because when it runs well, without any meltdowns such as your Hiroshimas and everything else, Chernobyls, I would say it's the cleanest form of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, I think it's just that constant fear of like a nuclear disaster or something going wrong, because the consequences are so high and you can't take that off the table. Like, you have to really, you know, I'm a business owner, so regulation is like the last thing I want to hear about when it comes to running your business and having government input on what I can and can't do. But when it comes to things like nuclear energy and comes to things that have, you know, consequential impact if things go wrong, industries like nuclear energy should be extremely funded by the government and extremely regulated, and every I needs to be dotted and every T needs to be crossed. And you see when that doesn't happen in, you know, a completely different industry. Like, we had the train derailment recently that happened in Ohio, right? So for people who kind of aren't up to speed on it, there was a train derailment in Ohio that had carried, you know, a plethora of toxic chemicals in it. And as those carriages kind of crashed into each other and you had all these toxic chemicals spilling around, there was a very high possibility of that exploding, especially if it came in contact with water. And so what the government went and did straight away was they burnt it, and in the process of burning it, you see all these toxic chemicals just rise into the air. Like, it was something straight out of a movie. It was terrifying to watch. And then those chemicals rose into the air and kind of stuck around. Like, have you seen that video of the guy screaming, like, these aren't fucking clouds, these aren't fucking clouds? Have you seen that video?
No.
Oh, you have to watch it.
These aren't storm clouds. This is the fucking shit that they burn off, the fucking shit they burn off in East Palestine. This is not fucking storm clouds. Look at it. This is over Darlington. This is their fucking success. That ain't no fucking storm cloud. That's the fucking shit from East Palestine. They're fucking controlled burn.
And I'm not really 100% sold on these things being entirely accidents. Like, my understanding was that it contaminated the water supply and people couldn't drink the water for a while. So, you know, and mind you, the government was telling them it's a conspiracy. When, you know, it's rainbow. You film the pond and there's a sheen to it, you know. So I just think sometimes what I notice is that there will be temperature checks in the news just to, like, really see how stupid people still are. You know what I mean? That's my assessment of it, honestly. It's kind of sad, but I look at stuff like that and go, you know, will they still drink the water? That's an interesting question. I would want to know that.
Well, it was interesting because the Environmental Protection Agency came out and said a couple of days after the accident occurred, everything's safe, everything's fine, you can drink the water, go back home, everything's good, possibly like 9 days after the accident happened. And then 2 days after that, they said, everything's still fine, you know, but maybe drink bottled water. Like, the message changed very quickly and everyone was like, oh, hang on, wait a second. And, you know, to a lot of people that might not seem like a big detail, but when you're talking about the nature of these chemicals that are consuming and are on surfaces, and, you know, children have the ability just to touch and put in their mouth, because kids put everything in their mouth. We're talking about something that is 10 times more toxic, 10 times more deadly, and has 10 times more consequences than COVID ever did, but is being treated almost as something we don't need to worry about. And I think what that speaks more to is the nature of government and the nature of power to move the goalposts along and hope that no one notices. And if you speak with enough authority and if you have it on the news and you get the right talking heads talking about it, then people would just buy into it blindly. And we saw that more than ever during COVID.
Yeah. No, I think They have to test people's psychology here and there. And some of it, I sort of see it going on and I go, okay, like if I was going to see where people were at and how much alarmism they're capable of, I would put something seriously bad in front of them, like a chemical explosion that's contaminated the water supply. I'd test my tone and see how they react to that if I remained calm and made them feel as though it was nothing, and then see if their intelligence overrides it and they do something about it and get angry, or if they stay mediocre and flat. And, you know, while we're talking about water, I don't drink tap water or even most bottled water. I drink reverse osmosis.
What's reverse osmosis?
Nutrient-free water. So no chlorine, no fluoride, no added chemicals. It's like a completely clean slate. And it is bad for you if you don't remineralize it and whatever else. But, you know, glazing over that, the reason is I do genuinely believe that the fluoride in the water supply makes us very passive people and it clouds our judgment.
How did you land on that conclusion?
I just noticed, I think there was a couple of days there where I was drinking the water and I noticed a fluctuation in the chemical taste, which wasn't really a normal thing. And I sort of thought, I might actually try just giving it up and drinking a more pure form of water, because I just got sick of tasting the weird chemicals every time I would go to a different area, because the water would just never be a consistent flavour.
Oh, right. So the water in Fairfield is different to the water in Liverpool.
Exactly right. And so, you know, after...
How much water do you drink to notice that? That is an astounding...
I guess I just have a keen sense of smell and...
Maybe.
Yeah.
That is... Yeah, that's... I've never even considered that. But yeah, you're probably right. Like, there's no way they could get the consistency across all of Australia.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you asked me if I wanted water when I came in here, and there's a reason why I bring my own bottle. It's because I just don't trust other sources of water now. And, you know, I've probably been fluoride-free for about 4 years, and I have never felt more mental clarity.
Wow.
You know, and I'm completely intolerant of tap water. I taste it, and all I can taste, in particular in Sydney, is bleach. You know, there's just this gross chemical burn to it, and it actually burns my throat as it goes down. And prior to that, I was so desensitized to it, I wouldn't have noticed. So like, well, if you take the mainstream message on its premise, you would say, well, the fluoride's in the water so that people's dental health improves. There's nothing to really back that up.
No?
No, it's like the biggest conspiracy. I'm like, okay, why? You know, show me the science.
But it's in your toothpaste. Like, isn't fluoride just that thing in your toothpaste and it goes in the water and it makes your teeth good?
All I know is it makes people really dumb. That's what I know. So there's a thing we joke around about called the fluoride stare.
The fluoride stare.
Yeah, it's where you tell somebody something very important. Like, you'll turn to somebody and give them very important news that does solicit some form of reaction, and they're just this deadpan, just blank slate. There's no emotional response, no empathy, no cognitive processing of what you've just told them, and it's just a fluoride stare.
It's the fluoride stare. I know a couple people with the fluoride stare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dead behind the eyes. And, you know, there are a lot of things in our environment that poison us. And one of the things that I found interesting was that my understanding is that China uses iodine to cleanse their water. And many people in the West were quite iodine deficient by nature. So, you know, iodine is very essential for our mental processing and all of that jazz. So I just thought, how interesting. We have an inferior poison in the water. And, you know, China's got some of the smartest people on the planet, so...
Yeah, that they definitely do. And I think that's more so akin to their political system, right? It's controversial in nature, and I don't personally align with their way of doing business and their way of doing government, but you do have to look at that end and go, oh, wait, they can just pivot so quickly because there's just less bureaucracy involved in their decisions.
Yes. I think, you know, some may turn around and argue that China's more obedient, so maybe they've got more poison in the water. And I'd go, well, I'd be pretty terrified of the government as well if I lived in China.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see me messing around all too much, although I admire some of their techniques, especially with Hong Kong.
Yeah. So you admired the way they handled Hong Kong then?
Well, you know, any form of dissent, in particular in such an extreme environment, is very brave. Some of the things that go on in China are just absolutely disgusting. I would not want to be them. I wouldn't want to live there. And so my hat goes off to them.
Are you talking specifically like under their surveillance, under the way they're able to control their populations? Are you talking about their war techniques? Like, what are you talking about specifically?
Mobile execution vans.
Mobile execution vans.
Locking people in buildings during the lockdowns, even when there's a fire, not opening up the doors. There's some really shocking things that have moved me over time, just coming out of China here and there. But one of the things I noticed, it was years and years ago, it was probably the first time I started noticing that China is really, really very different in terms of a society compared to us. And that was when I saw footage of the 2-year-old running around in traffic and being bumped around by different vehicles, and nobody that was walking past stopping to help her. And she was a girl,
wow.
A little girl. So I saw that and I'm like, what is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
I get it. You don't like girls, maybe. As far as I understand, boys are more highly favoured. But at what point did you lose touch with your humanity? So, I examine other countries like that. And then I look at Australia and think, we're really quite lucky to have things the way that we have them.
Is that what kind of draws you towards politics and what has made you decide to run in these elections? Is that because you value so much what it means to be Australian and you want to protect that so dearly?
Yeah, look, I think I don't recognise Australia compared to, say, 20 years ago. You used to go down to the pub and get a very good sense for the general temperament and the opinions of the masses. Right, the boys, the tradies, they'd be down there, they'd be having a beer, and they'd be, pissed off if the government does something that annoys them. And, there would be immediate dissent. So I don't see a lot of that these days. I see a lot of really meek people. Aussies, to me, they look a lot unhealthier than they probably did back then. And I just think there's going to come a point where if we don't really get it together, it's going to be too late. And, we're going to head in the direction of China if we give up things like our cash, if we put digital identity as the primary source of documentation, we're going to have these issues. But, I think once we lose the currency, that's when the government and whoever may potentially control that government and so on and so forth, then controls us as a whole.
Yeah, I think that currency one's really interesting. I first started paying attention to it actually during the lockdowns when we saw the rapid implementation of things like QR codes and the ability to track movements and radiuses, and it was absolute chaos. The technology that was used against the own people to express their freedoms that they're given at a birthright, implemented by the government, and the willingness of people to just go along with that really shocked me. So I started paying more attention to how governments introduce new technologies as a way of quote unquote making life better for everyone, but then having like an underhanded purpose for it. And I think what's been really interesting right now, in particular in New South Wales, is Dominic Perrottet has been very bullish on the idea of using cashless systems in casinos and clubs and places where you can gamble. Now, at a surface level, that sounds great. It sounds like, okay, well, Australia has one of the worst gambling losses per person in the world. It's up in the top 10. We have endless marketing for gambling. Like, it is a genuine issue. And I know people with gambling addictions, and it is debilitating. It's such a weird and strange addiction, and it's dirty, and it has a hold on you the same way a cocaine addiction has a hold on you. And I think, the premise makes sense, but then I don't necessarily believe the strategy does. Why does going cashless prevent people from gambling excessive amounts of money, especially if they can put their own limits in place?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I have so many concerns with that. Many politicians, they will crack down on things such as unexplained wealth, even on the minor right. I personally take more of a sovereign stance with a lot of this stuff, and that is that how people earn their money and what they do with it isn't largely the government's business and or problem. You know, I think that we've got problems with addiction and gambling and everything else the same way we have problems in other areas. And it's a symptom of just people, generally speaking, having low self-esteem and mental health problems. And then overall, I would really put it down to dopamine addiction.
Absolutely.
So, you know, whether that be drugs, gambling, social media, whatever else, I think a lot of us have these vices. And so, you know, I think that in particular with the gambling, my problem is that people will take out that $50 note and say, I'm going to use this. Once I lose it, it's gone. When you go digital, you limit people's ability to, like you were saying, manage their own money and set those limitations, because it's just a click of a button to up that threshold. I don't think that this is going to solve any problems the way that they pretend it's going to solve a problem. I think it's yet another thing that they want a virtue signal about.
Yeah, and I think it's almost sinister. It's almost sinister in its intent, because you're hiding behind the face of, okay, well, we're going to reduce people's ability to gamble. It's going to be better for society, except you can't use cash here. But once you give that power to government, they don't give it back. If anything, they double down on it, and they'll go, oh, you know, these gangs coming out of Penrith were using casinos to launder their money, but now they're using restaurants. Restaurants are the new casinos, and they're buying supposedly 10,000 pizzas at a time to try and launder all their money through restaurants. So now, to protect our restaurant industry and to make sure that drugs aren't being laundered through restaurants, we're going to make sure restaurants can't use cash. Now, I've worked in a lot of small businesses. I've worked in a lot of small restaurants, and I know how essential having cash at hand is for these businesses. And I know that reducing a business's ability to accept cash can be detrimental at the end of the day. You know, during COVID, there was essentially no cash circulating, and a lot of business suffered because of that. And it's unfortunate, but small businesses are very cash reliant. They need to have it. And beyond that, you're limiting people's ability to make a decision as to what they do with their own money. And that should be setting alarm bells for everyone.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know the threat that's really coming with the removal of cash. You know, we all know someone or 10 or some cousins in the West that run very successful cash businesses, you know, and they move their money around quite independently of the government. You know, people in the lower socioeconomic demographics, they have found ways to survive being on that lower income by avoiding things like payroll tax and whatever else. You know, they're very direct with how they get people to perform these duties in a workplace and so on and so forth. Single mothers go and get a cashier, you know, to supplement that income. So, you know, having a cashier I see to be one of the most Australian things on the planet. Right, okay. You know, we all have primary jobs, and then oftentimes people will have a cashier, and it just is that extra supplemented income, and it goes generally back into the economy anyway. It's where you get your luxury spends. People that gamble, they probably use a lot of their money from their cashiers. You know, so I can just see the attack on our prosperity. Cash is the only, you know, form of currency given to a business that isn't touched with fees. You know, there's no card processing fee. There's none of that. And so when you take that from a business, you're putting them at a disadvantage, in my opinion. So, you know, I've been strictly using cash as much as possible.
Oh, really?
Yeah, only in situations where you just genuinely can't, like say a parking garage or whatever. Yeah, cash is king, because it's in protest. They're removing the ATMs because, you know, through COVID and everything else, nobody was using them, and it costs them money to keep them maintained. So if people start to reignite their relationship with cash, the demand will be there, and they will keep the ATMs and keep, you know, upgrading them. And
yeah, but if from a legislative standpoint, if you can make cash almost illegal, like not necessarily illegal, but to a point where it's just not practical to use, then they won't even need to rely on, you know, reducing the number of ATMs. Like it'll just be a process by default, because like you said, if you make gambling with cash illegal, then what's to stop you from paying for a surfboard with cash illegal, or paying for anything with cash illegal. Like it's a very clear stepping process. You know, it's you give them a hand and they take an arm.
Yeah.
And it genuinely does concern me, because I think, you know, if you go back to the gambling thing we were talking about, right? Like, aren't there other ways that we can reduce the amount that Australians are gambling? Like, can't you just reduce that these companies are allowed to market, you know, in primetime television? Like, if you turn on the news now at 7 p.m, you've got at least four ads for Sportsbet. You've got at least another one for Better, and, you know, all these agencies that happen. And it's strange. It's really strange that we just allow that to be advertised so broadly to so many different people, but then we'll go and say, oh, people are gambling too much, we need to take away cash.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have an RSA and an RSG, Responsible Service of Gambling, right? So it's, you know, you do get some guidelines on how to help people help themselves. It's not entirely just people go in there and go for gold and spend their entire life savings, you know. I just see it as the next virtue signal. It's election season. They need something to throw their time and interest into that makes them look good and responsible and like the most amazing government ever. So it just seems meaningless to me. It's no more of an issue now than it was previously, right? And there've always been support services, counselling, that sort of stuff for people that have these addictions. But I think people's personal responsibility gets overlooked and the government becomes the default to come in and fix things. And that's what really blows my mind for the most part about this society. It's actually our personal responsibility to heal, to improve our quality of life. And the things that are available to us, if we don't have the strength within ourselves to not do them, that's not anyone else's problem. And at the end of the day, a lot of people, they have to hit rock bottom before they'll get up and fix themselves and fix their lives. And yes, it's unfortunate if a family is also impacted by that. But, you know, there's an element of me that says there's a real survival of the fittest element to society that makes me not entirely sympathetic to some of these things. Like, for example, if I were married and I had a husband and he was going out and spending all of my money, our money in the casino, I'd be cutting up the credit card. You know, like, we're going to fight about it.
It's either that or join him, right?
Honestly, I'd be like, we could do this the easy way or the hard way. I'll put you straight in the psych ward. Don't play with me. So, you know... So, you know, I guess you could say there's a radical streak to me in the way that I look at society. I think people are individually responsible and they need to be taught to be strong as opposed to succumbing to their weakness and asking the government to come and help them. I just think, you know, there's a real pathetic streak these days and it just needs to change. People need to come back in to their self-esteem, to their personal autonomy, you know, and start to just become strong people again.
Yeah, it's that... You know, with individual freedoms and the right to make your own decisions, you have also the accountability end of that, right? And so you need to be able to take accountability for the decisions you make. And I think where it gets a little bit sticky is that not everyone starts at the same point, right? Not everyone starts, you know, in a healthy household with, you know, a mum and a dad that love them. And not everyone starts, you know, some people start out on the street. Some people start with mum doing heroin. Some people start out with dad being gone for 5 years. So it's not like everyone does start at the same point. And I personally, I genuinely believe that if, as a country, Australia has a responsibility to elevate as many people as possible, rather. So for the people that do need help, we genuinely do have the resources, we have the money, and we have the ability to help them, so we should. But that doesn't remove the fact that there still needs to be accountability on that end. I mean, I know people very close to me that have gone through social service programs and have had to go through housing and had to go through programs where they needed access to food or access to just, you know, fundamental things to live. And it's not like it's sold to us. It's not like there's a, you know, just a mountain of dole bludgers that get away with doing nothing every single day. It's really not like that. To actually get money from the government is quite a hard thing to do. You need to be very diligent and you need to be very persistent. They don't just hand it out like that. And I think that's a
a notion that's kind of put forward that, you know, I'm going to go work a cashier and then get my student allowance from Centrelink and I'm going to be sweet and I'm going to be rolling around in cash. And it's like, yeah, okay, I'm sure there is a subset of the population that does do that. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that genuinely do that need that student allowance because they're getting hammered with loans and fees, and like just the general cost of living in Australia has probably never been this high in my memory anyways. I'm 23 years old and I've never seen the economy as fragile and as in such a disadvantageous position as what it is right now. And I think that's for a lot of voters, I think that's a big concern. Like, okay, if we are to put you in the position of head of state, or we are to put your party in charge of running this state, what are you going to do about the fact that I have to line up for 3 weeks to go rent in Abbotsbury, or I have to go and take out a credit card loan to fill up my tank with petrol? And I'm being facetious, of course, but like that is generally how it feels right now. Like we are at record high interest rates. We're at record high mortgage payments. We're at record high car payments. Credit card usage is through the roof. Like this is a very, very sticky situation for Australia to be in right now. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, the housing one, you know, the major parties have taken a leaf out of the book of a lot of the minor parties where we've said, make it easier for us to subdivide land and to build on it, shorten the red and green tape that it takes. You know, I mean, it's upwards of 6 months to get approval, sometimes even 12 to build. So a lot of people, in particular the first home buyers, the ones that really want to get into the market, there's just not that availability. It's too costly to put that money down on all these approvals to not have them go anywhere for 6 to 12 months. It's just there's too much government. Right, that's sort of where we come from with the libertarian perspective. You know, the Liberal Democrats in particular, you know, the less we're overly involved in people's lives, the better. You know, it shouldn't take a long time to let you approve a building plan and get into the housing market. Stamp duty is highly annoying. It shouldn't necessarily exist. Payroll tax, extremely annoying for business owners. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of tax and a lot of fees and a lot of problems inflicted by the government, and if they honestly just gave people a bit of a break, we would see a boom economically. We would see things like the housing crisis resolved. And so I just think any approach that the government seems to take is just void of common sense from what I can see. There are practical solutions. The question really remains, and it is, are you willing to give up the money that you make from us through these frivolous fees to help us live prosperously as the people of New South Wales? So, you know, they can act performative all they like during an election. I don't see them actually separating with our money. And what they spend our money on is oftentimes completely ridiculous. So, you know, I'm glad you touched on the student thing. I was talking to Damien Tudhope on the radio the other day, and he was saying that the Premier wants to give students, when they turn 18, money towards either their education or a home. And I'm sitting here going, you know, back in my day we had to earn it. And not every student is smart. Not every student.
The truth.
Yeah, disclaimer. So, you know, your arts degrees and whatever, they're sitting there on Centrelink being poor and upset.
You mean gender studies isn't a real degree?
Oh, no. But you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people who study, in particular the ones in business and whatever else, they've got a job on the side.
Yeah.
You know, that helps them stay afloat. And, you know, student allowance, my understanding, it's quite low, as you were saying before. I don't know what it is for the life of me these days, but I know it's not enough.
No. Could you find out? Student allowance. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. I think that people, for the most part, they will struggle to pay their rent as well as sustain themselves lifestyle-wise. So what often happens is this student allowance goes to their rent for the month, and then they will work their casual jobs to, you know, accommodate their lifestyle to the level that they want it. And that, honestly, I see that as their right. I don't care if it's a cashier. It's none of my business. If you're smart enough to actually make that work, make that happen, you're participating in the economy, you are boosting this country by doing that and supplementing your income. I don't see an issue. And I love the fact that people go out of their way to take responsibility for the lack of finances and resources that they have. it's a learning curve that needs to happen with young people. And I see a lot of people staying at home with their parents. They live off their parents' finances to sustain themselves through schooling. And then they will just go straight into a job. And they've not really accumulated any life skills and learnt how to survive on their own outside of whatever title they've ended up with at the end of the day. So I think there is a lot of character development that's being overlooked in young people. They don't have the self-esteem because they never had to do it on their own. And that self-esteem problem then carries into now where we have all of these art students whinging about climate change because there's nothing else for them to feel good about in their lives. They've never felt accomplished. So, you know, there's just so many things wrong with society, but ultimately less government seems to be the solution. A little bit more independence seems to be what is best overall.
Yeah, I think you've touched on some really interesting points there. And I think, you know, what really stands out to me, and I think you kind of revert back to this. Sorry, do we get an answer on that student allowance thing? $380 a fortnight. $380 a fortnight,
wow.
So $190 a week.
That's more pathetic than I thought it was.
Older than 18, living at home.
Yeah, living at home. Yeah.
Still $380 a fortnight. That's brutal.
I mean, if you don't have to pay rent, my sympathy isn't quite as high.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that the students that have to pay rent as well as do their degrees are the ones that really have it tough. I think if you live at home, that's 90% of your problems just gone.
Yeah. But I think, like, you know, one of the fastest ways to ensure the progress and ensure the development of a country to become like a leading economy is to have the next generation of people coming up to be as educated and as you know, have the right tools to do the job. You know, to become a psychologist, for example, is like an extensive career. It is like an 8 to 10 year study period alone. And then after that, you're looking at a mountain of student loans. And then during that time period, you're probably in uni about 4 or 5 days a week. Like it's a very intense course. So you're working maybe on the weekends and then during study periods. Like it's not necessarily that students just get, you know, they get to live at home and they get to live off mum and dad's coin and they go and study an arts degree. Like that caliber of human being definitely does exist, and those probably are the more frustrating ones. But I think the onus is more on the universities in that sense. It's the universities that allow that to happen. Yeah,
so the universities have been oversaturated for a long time in terms of, you know, people going to be psychologists. It's very full. You know, these are the more easy degrees. You don't require as high a level of education to get into some of these courses. And so you've got heaps of kids in one particular course or another. And the skill level coming out of those courses is really not particularly special. And so the industries that maybe would want these students ordinarily and would expect the best of the best only then picks a handful of those students, and people sit around with the useless degrees. And the only thing that makes them useless is because of the oversaturated degree process, you know. So the easy ones where you're in there for like 3 years and whatever and you're done and dusted, no worries. There's heaps of people in those. And that's why I think, you know, if what you're saying is correct about the time of which it takes to obtain certain degrees, they've done that because it gives them more money, but it also gives them the ability to differentiate a skill set within an industry because there's too many people in them. So, you know, it's as corrupt as anything else, you know. There's a lot of international students that come through the universities too because they pay so much money to be there. So, you know, I think Aussies that want to get in there and get a skill set, it's just not as reliable in the unis that you'll end up with the job that you want at the end of it. And so I think people tend to lean on TAFE a lot of the time and they'll pursue the trade route, which I don't necessarily see a problem with, you know. The idea that you have to be university educated to do anything in this world I think is ridiculous. We have the internet at our fingertips. There is no degree that the internet, if I know where I'm looking, can't teach me. bar the actual practical things like maybe a surgical residency.
Yeah, I was just about to say
problems with because of the muscle memory and everything else that you would get associated. From
if someone was operating on my rib cage and was pulling up a YouTube video, hey guys, welcome back, I'd have a couple questions for him. I'd be like, hey man, are you sure you're the right guy?
Yeah, but in terms of information, if we're strictly talking intelligence, right, we're not talking about the practical skills that you would get from a hands-on degree and the more sophisticated things, but base intelligence is more accessible to us than it ever has been.
Absolutely, especially with the automation of information. Like when you start looking at technologies like AI, when you start looking at things like, I think just yesterday ChatGPT 4 released, and its capabilities are remarkable. I haven't even touched it yet, but there's already 7,000 TikToks about what it can do, and it's pretty intense. Like we're seeing a lot of AI capability that's available to the public, which I think is a very important asterisk to put next to it, because the way I've noticed that technology works is that if you have access to a drone in Big W, it's because 20 years ago the military was using that to bomb a city in Yemen. And it's just been dumbified down to the point where, okay, this is available for consumers now. The breaking edge technology generally gets militarized pretty much straight away. Just like the atomic bomb, just like the splitting of the atom, it was used for renewable energy and then got turned into a bomb. And so, there's no doubts that there are definitely some countries that have access to AI-equipped military-grade missiles that strike 100% of the time or something crazy like that. But what we are seeing is a lot of change in industry now. So we're seeing a lot of industries where they go, okay, well, that NDA that I needed a lawyer to write up, ChatGPT 4 can do that for me in 30 seconds and I don't have to pay a cent for it, or maybe I have to pay like $20 a month for it. And as we continually hit these new evolutions of technology evolving at rates that we haven't seen before, it's going to come to a point where we go, okay, well, how many jobs is this technology actually going to replace? Like how many truck drivers is Tesla, for example, actually going to get off the roads? How many factory workers are really going to be left without work because Jeff Bezos has decided, you know what, that robot can do the exact same pick-packing job that you can, and I don't have to pay Christmas rates, I don't have to pay it, annual leave or maternity leave or anything like that. Like it keeps going all the time.
I haven't really landed on a concrete opinion regarding the AI. I am so curious to see how this pans out.
Yeah.
In terms of survival of the fittest, I am not angry that AI is replacing certain things, say journalism. There are certain industries that are not entirely amazing anyway, where I sort of go, well, if people want to use AI to supplement that and still get paid to do it and so on and so forth, that's interesting. And if they get fired because AI replaces them, I find that even more interesting because those people then hit rock bottom, and from rock bottom, they start using their common sense because the survival instinct kicks in. So I think I welcome AI becoming an inconvenience because it speeds up the process of which people then start to reject these ridiculous, overreaching systems such as artificial intelligence and then bring it back to a normal scale in which we use it for convenience, but it doesn't dominate our entire lives, which it sort of does. Technology is everywhere. And so, I think the only way to really start turning that around is to just go head first as fast as possible so we can pick up the pieces, because it is truly an inevitability.
Yeah, it is. We've hit that threshold now where, okay, like we're here, AI is here. It's going to be, implemented in ways that we can't even imagine yet. Like when the internet was first birthed and we first had access to like something as simplistic as Google Images, right? We never saw the evolution of what that would become today. And the fact that you can have the answers to every single problem, to every single question, and every single moment in history is pretty much accessible to your phone, as long as Google lets you see it. So you put a 10-year span, a 50-year span, a 100-year span on that. It's like how long can you actually protect those jobs? But the reason I wanted to bring that up initially was because as technology continues to displace people, it does have long-term benefits, but short-term, there's a lot of growing pains. And when you start looking at things like the transportation industry in New South Wales in particular, right, it is a hot button issue right now. It's a big problem. I mean, there have been strikes going on for the last couple months, I believe. And, this isn't, Australia definitely does not lead the way in terms of how our public transport system works. When you go to other countries like Europe, other continents like Europe, or you go to places like I was recently in Qatar for the World Cup, which is a very interesting experience. And they custom built an entire railway system that could take you from one end of Qatar to the other one, and it was completely automated. It was completely run by robots. And it was a train there every 2 minutes, and it was exceptional. And granted, Qatar is a lot smaller of a country than what Australia is, but if Qatar's only been around for 20 years and Australia's been around for much longer than that, then why aren't we implementing those technologies?
Yeah, interesting. I think last I checked, the person that I knew that worked in the transport industry was only frustrated by the lack of staff and the amount of overtime people were performing because of the mandates. Mm-hmm. And that was a long time ago. So, I don't know where it's at now, but I would say I don't even necessarily have an issue with the public transport, in particular in Sydney. I think it's pretty comprehensive. But then again, I've used a lot of other public transport that's been trash in the past.
I think just last week there was mass stoppages because of I think they put it down to a technical fault or something like that, but
Well, I'm trying to recall exactly what it was, but I had a friend that's a train driver, and she was telling me the frequency of suicides with the tracks and the amount of disruption that happens with them. And how frequent it is. And they get around 4 to 6 weeks of counselling every time they accidentally run someone over as a train driver. So it's paid leave.
How often is it?
I think she was saying around at least once every 2 months minimum, there will be somebody that throws themselves in front of the train. And I can't imagine what that is now that we've been through all this COVID stuff. We've got the economic problems and so on and so forth. But, there are a few maintenance things that aren't always maintenance. And some of those delays are just people killing themselves.
Yeah. And that's heavy.
Yeah. I'm sorry to throw that out there, but I'm like,
no, but it's an absolutely good point. And there are just things that happen that you can't control. And, on the human end of it, right? Because we are talking about people's livelihoods and we are talking about people's jobs and what they do on a regular basis, probably overworked, probably understaffed. It's extremely frustrating to see that the union and the state can't come to an agreement in terms of, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe some of the terms that they're asking for is like the ability to wear shorts during summer and like pretty simple stuff. And it's like, yeah, give the train, the people that work in the transport system a raise if they ask for it. Like, it makes sense. We need that system.
Yeah. As I understand it, they're above 6 figures anyway, in terms of their wages. I think the issue is probably they don't seem to have enough qualified staff. And if the reason why I brought up the leave with the 4 to 6 weeks of leave, if you hit someone, it puts you out of work. And so, if there aren't really enough drivers and so on and so forth, and maybe say 4 people kill themselves in that one span, as opposed to maybe 1 or 2, you may end up with a lot less staff to operate these trains. And so it interests me. I'd like to know a lot more about it. But the solution is always to get more people qualified and into those jobs. So,
And how do you do that?
You bring them in. You teach them how to drive a train.
But I don't want to be a train driver. I want to be a TikToker.
Why not? I would be. Seriously, 6 figures, you cruise around all day. I don't hate it for optics. I actually don't. The suicide thing is a smidge rough, but...
Yeah, just a tad.
Yeah, got to have thick skin in a lot of different jobs and, yeah.
Yeah, and, I think when you fall back to, like, how the state allocates its resources, it's always important to keep in mind that when you put out one problem, like another one pops up. Like for example, you take care of the transportation issue. Let's just say the unions come to a peace point and say, okay, like, we're happy with the deal we've got. Then it's the nurses that are going up, and then the nurses are demanding certain things, and it's a tricky balancing game that you play in those roles. So assuming let's put you in a position here where you get ultimate power, right? You are in the People's Republic of Australia, and you've got the magic wand that gives you ultimate power to, address any problems in Australia. What are the top priorities? What would you address straight away, and how would you address it?
Well, look, it's not actually a so distant reality. If I did get elected, if I do get elected, I likely would have the balance of power, and I'd pick up that final seat, the way it would stack, which means with that, I very much would have the ability to hold up the parliament until my demands are met, as I understand it. And one of those, you just touched on the healthcare crisis. One of those is getting people that are unvaccinated back to work. And one of the things that a lot of the nurses are complaining about is the staff shortages, forcing them into horrendous amounts of overtime, of which they are not appropriately compensated for. Now, the media will focus on the money element of that, but the issue is they do not have enough staff to man these beds. So, you're looking at 12 to 36 hours at the maximum in these emergency rooms. A mate of mine was in there for, I think, 13 hours the other week with a serious autoimmune disease. We've seen a woman in the Blacktown car park at the hospital giving birth and being assisted by the protesting nurses. And these are all things that are happening because there just aren't enough staff in there to accommodate the amount of people coming in sick. So plenty of beds, not enough people to man them. There is an obvious fix to the healthcare crisis, and that is to just let people go back to work. And they won't do that. Instead, they want to throw sums of money at up-and-coming nurses to get more people into those industries and give them bonuses rather than just do the common sense thing,
which is to let unvaccinated workers come back to work.
Absolutely. And it's not just the nurses. There's the paramedics, fireys, lots of other healthcare professionals as well that are just benched and they're just desperate to get back in there. So John Larder, he's on our upper house ticket. So he's a paramedic in Tumut and his job has not even been replaced. And he was the one on the radio talking to Dominic Perrottet about the fact that he's, 25 years strong as a paramedic and still unable to go back to work. And it doesn't make any sense because there aren't any less sick people, there aren't any less emergencies, there's just less staff to deal with them. And if these people truly cared about our health and safety, they would fix it and deal with the immediate threat at hand, which is that lives can be lost if we do not have enough of these qualified staff back at work.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on a really interesting point there in saying that, it's not that Australia has a shortage of students that desire to be nurses. That's definitely not it. But there's definitely been a shift where to become a nurse now, you have to jump through extra hoops and you have to jump through extra processes. I mean, my girlfriend recently just got hired by Campbelltown Hospital. And it wasn't a process of okay, here are my qualifications, here are the things that I've done, here's all the information that you require from me, do an interview and you're ready to go. It is like an 8 to 10 week process of checking, double checking, making sure vaccinations are up to point, making sure these documents are certified by the right people. Oh, that certifier doesn't count towards our hospital, so you need to go to a different certifier. It is a lot of just jumping through different hoops in order to get that job. And that's 10 weeks of having a nurse not working because of all this crap in between. And that's extremely frustrating. And I think New South Wales in particular does suffer that across a lot of industries where there are just so many rules and regulations and processes that you have to go through that were probably put in there with good intent, but have the undesired consequence of actually reducing the amount of available help that they could be receiving.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those so over-regulated industries. The bureaucracy is insane, in particular APRA and all of their checks and balances and all of that nonsense. It's just there are immediate threats to people's safety, in a genuine way, from not having staff in there. And as I understand it, I spoke to some nursing students that weren't even able to go and finish their final years because they're unvaccinated. So, I have no sympathy in many ways when it comes to people struggling to fill these roles in the hospital. Because, you know, if I were a fellow nurse at the time of which we were losing staff because of mandates, even if I were vaccinated, I would have put my foot down and said, no, you will not get rid of our staff. You will not put our patients at risk. You know, and we're a team and we will not let other people be discriminated against. I mean, that's what people of integrity do. So, you know, I just look at it and I go, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth in a way that nurses...
Kind of like fluoride?
Yeah, kind of like the fluoride. No, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth that, you know, there are vaccinated nurses standing out the front protesting about their wages instead of standing out the front protesting about their wages, their overtime, and the fact that their colleagues can't come back to work. You know, like, where is the Australian team spirit?
Yeah, the matesmanship.
Yeah. You know, it's just unacceptable. And so, you know, the last few years have really changed my perspective on many people. There aren't a lot of people that I have a lot of time for in my life anymore, and it's because I've seen the way people have just buckled under pressure and given in and given up their core principles that I thought they once had to throw people under the bus just over a little bit of fear. You know, they've shown that a lot of relationships are so transactional, and, you know, at the end of the day, they don't really have a spine or the ability to advocate themselves, let alone for someone else.
Yeah, so I take it then you're not vaccinated.
Absolutely not. No. I actually said on TNT radio the other day, I was like, I wasn't going to do it because, Brad, what have you done for me lately? Hazard told me to do it. Like, there's absolutely no scenario where some narcissist with a politician hat is sitting there acting as though they have authority over my life and I'm going to be receptive to that. It's just not a reality. And I think there's such a performative aspect to politics, you know, where they come in and they act like these big heroes. And I look at them and go, have you ever actually held down a real job? Because the way that you carry yourself and conduct yourself as a human being does not, you know, inspire me to look up to you as an authority figure. You know, so I just think our perception of authority is also very skewed as well. And people wear a lot of different hats, acting as though they have your best interests at heart and they're able to tell you what to do with yourself. But it's just not true. The world is really a stage. There are so many different aspects of our society that are fake. And it's kind of hard to reconcile that when you look around and you know that you're a real person and you see all of these different systems in place that just keep people. But
the issue is that maybe not so much today, but definitely in the peak of it, if you spoke the way you're speaking now and if you said, okay, I'm not going to get vaccinated because I don't have trust for the politicians that are mandating these things and I don't like the processes that they're using and I don't like that there is a health order that's being put in place that won't let me work because I'm not vaccinated. If you spoke like that, you were branded a conspiracy theorist or, you know, an Alex Jones sympathizer or whatever the case was. People would just put you into a corner and say, oh, don't worry about her. She's just one of the crazy ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we protested, isn't it? You know, I just, you know, it's very easy to call people cookers. It's so intellectually lazy. But the thing is that all these people that want to criticise people that have taken this standpoint, in particular myself, I've run circles around them intellectually. You know, there's nothing anyone's been able to profoundly say to me that has, you know, gone into conflict with the fact that nobody tells me what to do with my body. You can't. There is nothing that makes you a higher authority that you can ever tell me what to do. So, you know, at the end of the day, you can't argue with that. People have a lot of different reasons why they will refuse medical treatments. Some of it is religious. Others just, they know their bodies and their limitations, or intuitively they look at something and think this is dangerous. And my gut feeling in terms of this vaccine was that it's dangerous and it can hurt me, so I'm not taking it. I don't need a damn shred of evidence from anyone else that will change my mind on that, because I trust my gut feeling and my own personal discernment.
Where do you think that gut feeling came from?
I mean, a lot of us are intuitives. But, you know, deception has a ring to it the same way the truth does. So all of the propaganda, the constant telling us it's the most amazing thing in the world and we must do it, the red flags were really going off for me. You know, the more you push it, the more suspicious, you know, people should become.
Yeah. I think it almost became like its own religion in a way. And to this day, people still defend the actions of Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson or Purdue or any of the big pharmaceutical companies, and they'll show you their 17 vaccines and put it in their Instagram bio and proudly state how proud they are to represent this team. And I've always found that a little bit weird. I've always found that almost like a cult mentality as to like, I made this decision based on the facts and the hard science. And, you know, you come to find out 2 years later down the track that the science was manipulated, that the science was changed, that the research that was put forward was washed 3 times by Pfizer before it was put forward, or the idea that the virus rather came out of a wet market in Wuhan was, you know, at this point in day is unlikely according to different agencies in the United States. And it's been really interesting to see how people just kind of have to find new ways to defend a goalpost that has been moving for the last 2 years.
Well, you know, there's a reason I've consistently rejected the virus narrative. And my stance to this day is still, I don't care. Because at the end of the day, people can say whatever they want. It won't necessarily be based in fact, but what they can't do is tell me what to do. And it's the best way to keep it simple. But I'm glad that you touched on the fact that it's a cult, because the way cult leaders break down their victims is by isolating them, by making them feel dirty or inferior, so they're not capable of making their own decisions, depriving them of human contact, and then turning around and trying to pretend they're the Lord and Saviour to their problem.
Yeah.
And that's basically what the government has done through the lockdowns and through this virus narrative, scaring everyone, thinking each other are dirty, you know, oh, people who don't comply or people that want to go to work are the most selfish people on the planet. You know, and all of this is really a product of low self-esteem. These people, you know, that fell for this hook, line and sinker, they don't feel particularly special about anything in their life. There's nothing they've done that makes them feel, you know, fulfilled, like their life has any purpose. And I think en masse, a lot of people have this problem. And so it's that lack of purpose and lack of things to really feel good about that gets people to throw themselves into the virus narrative, stay home, stay safe.
Perhaps, but perhaps people are also just scared. I know a lot of people that are genuinely just terrified that this was the end of the world, that this was Contagion, or this was I Am Legend.
Yeah, I guess that's true. You know, I just, when I say the people with the self-esteem problems, I guess my mind is going to the loudest voices on this, the most combative ones. And I do really feel sorry for the people that stayed at home genuinely terrified, as opposed to being more performative and carrying on about it the way a lot of the extreme victims of the cult, I would say, carried on about it. But, you know, again, a lot of it is survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't been raised with critical thinking. They are easily isolated. They can't self-regulate. They can't self-soothe. They don't trust their own discernment. And I guess really that is what is most depressing about this society, is that you've got all of these wounded people that don't even necessarily know that they're broken and that they need to start rebuilding themselves to be better, you know, after these few years gone by. So
what we do have to keep in context, and we do have to keep that conversation flowing, is that a lot of the economic issues that we are facing today are a direct correlation to the amount of government spending and the amount of government, you know, essentially just printing money to uphold an economy where no one was working. Like that has significant flow-on effects to the economy later on when those bills do need to be paid. And there is just too much money circulating, and then all of a sudden, to slow the economy down, you have to bump up interest rates. Or what happens when you bump up interest rates? Mortgages go up and so forth. Like, there's a very clear economic impact that these lockdowns and these mandates had on Australia, and we're only paying the bill for that now. But they won't put it down on that. They'll put it down on things like Ukraine and things like they'll just find they'll make the banks the bad guy. for example. And I think it's a lack of accountability. It's a lack of honesty in saying that, yeah, we printed $1 gazillion during this pandemic, and now we just have to slow the economy down. There's too much money being circulated.
Yeah, I mean, I've never taken out a loan, and it's because I view loans as being very fundamentally unstable, whether that be for a home or otherwise. And, you know, I'm not a homeowner, but if I were a homeowner, I'd say that I would actually sell my house now and move my money into assets that cannot fluctuate because of the instability economically at the moment. You know, I'd be inclined to withdraw myself from the housing market, let it crash, and then swoop in with my wealth to buy some more properties. Because it will fluctuate, it will crash, it will reset. You know, you have to go with the waves with the economy. And I think, you know, people they get so trapped in this, if I don't own my home, I'm worthless and I have nothing and my life is over. No, like you can take tactical withdrawals from certain things. Like if you know that you have $300,000 left on a mortgage and that your interest rates are about to cook your entire lifestyle, it's not a bad thing to sell that home, downsize, say, to a regional property somewhere and rebuild.
Yeah.
You know, and people are so afraid to give up these loans and these assets that technically don't belong to them for a sense of security and status.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. It comes to status. It comes down to what suburb do you live in and what country club are you a part of and what clothes do you wear and what school do your kids go to. It is that innate human competitiveness that does drive people to make these decisions. It's, you know, it's the purest form of consumerism possible. Give me a loan for $1 million. I'm going to buy this house that I can't afford, but I'll figure a way to pay it later. And the banks are just like, okay, sweet. And you know, it's a scary time. It's a scary time. I think, considering that I am 23 and that I've, you know, if there is a category of people that will benefit the most from this economic situation right now, it is my generation, because we have for the longest time just been frozen out of the market because prices have just been ridiculously high, and it probably will take a crash to allow us to come back in. But it's, you know, it's scary because I've got parents, I've got grandparents, and, you know, their life savings and their lifestyle and their ability to sustain themselves in a household is at risk.
Yeah, no, I get that. Again, a lot of this does come down to survival of the fittest again, because, you know, being prepared for these things is what will change the outcome. A lot of people need to take a page out of the WOG handbook, the Asian handbook, and realise that they can regroup, move back into the one property that is owned, that doesn't have a loan on it, and then accrue those assets, that general wealth, and then explode it into the next set of properties when you're ready.
Yeah. I think the frustration more so comes from the fact that I think we see it more in the States, but the big bailouts, the big economic influxes of cash that go into, you know, major financial institutions, such as, for example, the Silicon Valley Bank recently just made a handful of poor decisions, you know, was at risk of not being able to pay back all of their depositors, and because of that started a bank run where everyone just wanted to withdraw their money all at the same time because they're like, oh, this bank isn't secure anymore, what's going to happen to my money? And you almost see that they play by their own rules. The government just goes in and goes, oh, okay, like we got the bill on that one.
You're talking to somebody that doesn't necessarily believe that banking's legitimate. So this is hard for me because, as I understand it, if I cannot feel it, I cannot touch it, and I know it doesn't hold any existing wealth, it's a scam.
So you're not into crypto, I take it?
No. So, you know, I think my assessment is there's more money outside of the banks being loaned by the bank than there is sitting inherently within it, which means, technically speaking, they're all broke. And so what does it take for them to crash? And so for me, if anything seems unstable, my money and my assets aren't going into it. That's just how I look at it, you know. I don't trust these people. I don't I don't trust financial institutions to maintain integrity. I certainly don't think that the government coming in to bail them out with our money that we pay in tax is a good thing either. And so, the main thing that I've encouraged people to do is get assets that people cannot devalue on your behalf.
You seem to be very skeptical of the system and the way it's set up. Is that kind of attributed to the way you grew up? Like, where do you think you garnered this skepticism for everything around you? Because for most people, they take the bait hook, line and sinker.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up pretty poor. So, a lot of my earlier years were training myself out of scarcity mindset. Realizing that we take literally nothing with us to the grave, and our wealth largely is a reflection of our lifestyle and how well we can live it, more so than what it is based on what we own and can accrue in any non-physical form. So, I've got a detachment from a sense of status. Status is a scam. It's a manipulation tactic. It keeps us spending outside of our comfort zones. There are a lot of things that I see in this world that are inherently corrupt, and the ways in which we've been manipulated as people and had our value systems recalibrated by things outside of any realistic personal control, I just find so interesting. So, my relationship with money, I would argue, is almost healthier than the more wealthy people who have much better lives than me, because I feel more stable knowing that no matter what, even though I own significantly less than many people, it can't be taken from me. I'm not going to be a victim of a loan increase in terms of the interest rates. There are certain freedoms that come with distancing yourself from these burdens. And anything that is controlled by someone else, I would be skeptical of personally, especially during these times. I don't necessarily care the whys or the hows of the reasons why it's unstable and may fluctuate. What I care about is that I cannot personally control it. Therefore, I cannot trust my asset to remain in good hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's a very wise way of dealing with money, and a lot of people get sucked into the idea of exponential growth and constantly wanting to beat the last quarter and the last quarter and the last quarter. And there are just limitations to that innately. Like, at what point are you just $1 trillion company and the next trillion is going to come at a massive consequence to society?
Yeah, I mean, I look at billionaires, millionaires, so on and so forth, and they all seem to echo a similar sentiment, although not putting it as directly as I'm about to, and that is, it's not what is on you, it's what's in you that keeps you wealthy and prosperous. So it doesn't matter, if you have one business or 10, what matters is that if you lose one, you have everything you need in terms of your skill set to do it again and again and again. And you will continually be able to get up and rebuild. It doesn't matter what somebody takes from you. So, the ability to accrue wealth is a skill just like anything else. It's not one that's commonly taught. And so that's what really interests me about the business world and finance and all this sort of stuff. People don't really sit down and teach you.
No, it's not taught. It's not taught in schools. It's not echoed through social media. It's not, unless you go into those facets, I guess. Like, the internet is almost the great equalizer, that if you are interested in mortgage-backed securities, you can learn everything that you could possibly want. But it's not necessarily being promoted the same way that something as widely accepted now today as gender politics is. If within the first 5 scrolls of a TikTok feed, you're definitely going to find someone announcing their pronouns. You're definitely going to find someone announcing the way that they feel and the way that you must address them and see them with kitten ears. And it's probably worth saying off the bat that I believe in individual freedom, and I believe in individual accountability. So I think if you want to dress however you want to dress, then by all means, who am I to stop you? That's not necessarily where I stand with it. But I just personally don't want that advertised. I don't want that in my face. I don't want that, across my feed all the time. And the algorithms are pretty good at reading that. They're going to give me different content. But it does seem that right now in society, there is one class of people that cannot be ridiculed. They cannot be mocked. They are a protected species, if you will. And I also know that you've been kind of combatant with that.
Yeah, look, I kind of draw the line on drag queens being naked in front of children. This
What's wrong with that?
This is the stuff that really, really gets me enraged. There is no group on the planet that I could perceive as being so marginalised as to ever justify being able to do whatever they want when it comes to kids. I don't care. It doesn't interest me what your sexuality is, or how you want to express yourself, because you have taken a direct approach to overstep into someone else's territory, which is what happens with their kids. So, I feel sorry for people with the pronouns in the bios and the combative attitude surrounding how they wish to be addressed and treated. Because it all comes down to this global self-esteem problem that we seem to have. People don't feel as though they have any control over their lives, so they must go out of their way to assert themselves. How best to do that? Okay, I'll use some pronouns, I'll change something about myself, and I will demand that others treat me of status in the way that I believe I should be treated.
Yeah, see, I think I agree with you on most of that, but honestly, I've got no problem if someone wants to go and dress up as a cat and meow in their front lawn. Like that's their right and their ability, maybe the back lawn, but whatever. It's their ability to do, their right to do so if they feel so compelled. I would probably have some mental checks on that person every once in a while and just say, hey, Fred, you're doing all right. But, aside from that, what can you really do? If that's how Fred wants to spend his time, then Fred's going to dress up as a cat and pee in a litter box. But when that becomes the norm for everyone around you, and suddenly schools have to have litter boxes in them, and suddenly workplaces are expected to have litter boxes or address people in certain names, that's kind of where I draw a line, where I'm like, okay, you're taking one subset of the entire human population and creating rules that the rest of society have to appeal to, and at their own detriment, essentially. Like, people get fired.
Yeah, it's the narcissism for me. These LGBT activists calling the shots and pressuring politicians and being in their ears all the time are not a reflection of the LGBT community at large. So we just have this whole victim mentality coming from the most extreme example in society and then being projected onto the general population. And it's just completely disproportionate to what people actually need or want, and I don't mind people doing their own thing. As long as you're not a pedophile, it doesn't bother me. Yeah. Keep it off the streets if it's indecent, keep it behind closed doors and do your thing. I think we can all agree that being gay is really normal now. There's no batting of the eyes when you see a gay couple walking down the street. No one cares whatsoever. It's these extreme sexualizing, it's like the artwork, the bondage on the side of a wall with a stuffed teddy bear as the head, where it's visible to the general public. And, that particular piece of art, there's a photograph of a little girl holding a stuffed rabbit looking up at that. And I look at that and I go, you're really deliberately messing with people's innocence and forcing young people to be exposed to what you perceive as normal, rational, appropriate art.
Interesting. See, I understand that take, but I almost give like a creative license to artists and comedians and musicians alike, where it's an expression, it's a statement, it has to be provocative, it has to be loud, it has to be in your face for people to talk about it, right? Like, how many other murals did this person paint that no one really cared about, but when they came up with this one, this is the one that they're known for now? Isn't that just the nature of creativity, that you have to push the envelope as far as as far as you possibly can?
Of course, you just do it in an art gallery, not in front of kids.
Right.
That's my whole standpoint. You know, I honestly don't care what people do in their spare time. Just keep it away from the kids. It's really very simple. If someone's naked, or if there's sexual content, or if it's perverted in any way, it doesn't belong on a public wall. It doesn't belong on someone's body in a pride march, you know. The same way I feel that some of the outfits that are worn during the pride marches are just way too inappropriate for something that has been, you know, marketed as a family-friendly event. You've got these little kids in pictures next to the guys with the dog fetish in the leather. So, you know, this is the stuff that just, it blows my mind that it's even considered normal these days. I have such a fatigue even talking about it, because how many times do you have to jump up and down telling somebody that this is wrong for them to actually see it for what it truly is, you know?
There's just a genuine parental instinct that kicks into play that people, it's almost biological in nature. It's almost, there's just an instinctual need to protect your children and protect the people around you when you are operating as such small tribes. And when you do feel an external threat, you do feel like there's images that are provocative, that are sending a weird message, that are normalizing things like, you know, men wearing bondage, or men wearing furry costumes, or dog, whatever you're into. It's people perceive that as a threat. And I was very strong counterpoint that I've seen on the internet, and a lot of what I'd like to hear your take on is that, but when that is put into a straight relationship, right, that's not taken the same way. Like, we have images of women in lingerie all over Westfields, all over Stocklands, all over anywhere. Why is that accepted? But when someone paints a mural of a guy in bondage, that's an issue.
Yeah, so the grown women in the lingerie commercials, they're not coming after kids. It is content that is geared exclusively to adult men. When you put a gay man in a mural with a stuffed teddy bear over his face, presenting him as fun and friendly with the rainbows, what you're really targeting are the eyes of children.
Right.
It is child's toys being featured. It's leather. It's half-naked men. So, you know, the rainbows are concerning, to say the least, because the whole movement on this side of the LGBT is fun and colourful. The way it's marketed is very childlike in nature. Unlike adult sexual content between heterosexuals, I don't see heterosexuals really going after that in terms of their advertising and marketing.
But couldn't you say that a woman standing in lingerie at the front of a store that's opposite a Kmart is kind of provocative in nature, and there are bound to be kids passing that? I mean, I remember when I was 6 years old, I'd walk past these stores and go, oh wow, they sell bras, and like right there in front of you is like a mannequin wearing these provocative clothing, and it's a weird thing that as a society we've kind of just accepted as normal.
Well, when you look at women, a lot of kids, they grow up seeing their mothers naked and they see them in their bras and undies. It's something, you know, I grew up with. It's so normal. You know, children expect female bodies to be around. It's not something that's abnormal for a child to experience the female form. And the female form is not specifically targeting a child. Women are often in the nurturing roles in children's lives. They're not out there trying to entice them sexually in any way. And our bodies as women aren't really naturally sexualized. In particular, children don't tend to sexualize us the way adults would sexualize us. But what does come across as sexual in nature to children is bondage on a wall with your whips and your chains and your strap-on dildos in the streets and your leathers. And it just, there is a line that has been so clearly crossed in this department, and parents are starting to cotton on to the fact that they need to guard their children. And that's why there is a rally this Saturday. You know, pretty much the whole of Western Sydney is coming because we've had enough. Because now the line has been very clearly crossed and we expect some form of, you know, relief from this hardcore extremist LGBT agenda. And it's not your average gay person that's really pushing this. So that's what is kind of sad for me. You know, your average LGBT person agrees that none of this should be anywhere near kids, but unfortunately we're at the point where we must actually put a stop to it.
Yeah.
You know, and yes, there will be an uncomfortable period of time in which every person, you know, on that side of the fence in the LGBT may feel as though they're being attacked. But I'm not willing to compromise on the overall message, which is that this stuff doesn't belong near our kids. Get away from them. So, you know, we have to try and be kind and fair to people in the LGBT communities that do agree with us, and they do exist. There's plenty of them.
Yeah, there's a whole Instagram community. I think it's Gays Against Groomers or something along those lines that really stands for the principles that you are talking about, where it's people that, you know, they are gay or they are bisexual perhaps, and they do strike the same issues that you're bringing from right now. You did touch on the point a little bit before, though, that it is normal for a child to be subject to, you know, the female form because it's so nurturing in nature, and it's just a natural part of growing up as a child is that you are exposed to that form a lot more frequently. But what about the cases where it's two dads in the picture instead?
So deliberate motherless or fatherlessness is child abuse.
Wow.
Yeah, and I won't ever backpedal from that position. There is a very clear difference between kids that have lost a parent for divorce, abandonment and death and natural family breakdown than there is somebody purposefully going out of their way to take something from a child. And, you know, many people in the LGBT community just don't do that. They actually do go and they pursue their friends as donors, and they do, you know, give their child the other parent and access to that parent, as well as maybe having two mums or two dads. So it's absolutely not everyone. And, you know, my position, even through the same-sex marriage debate, was very clear on that, you know, where I don't necessarily like it, because, you know, bringing different adults, in particular in largely non-monogamous households, bringing different adults in front of children into their homes, into their lives in any transient sense can pose a risk. I tend to lean towards, well, at the very least, I will encourage people to choose a co-parent from their communities if they do insist on making rainbow families. So, you know, where a lot of people will say gay people shouldn't have kids, I would lean in to say, well, you know, they do anyway. I exist. And so there is a way to go about that is a lot healthier than what, say, the anonymous donation route will sort of have an impact on. You know, commercial surrogacy is just human trafficking with extra steps. Genuinely. And you know what? People don't ask questions. Like if you're a gay person and you go in there, you just buy that seed. Or you end up with a surrogate when you go overseas. You buy a baby. What is to stop a pedophile from doing that?
Yeah, I guess.
You know?
Yeah.
We've seen that in the US recently.
Really?
Yeah, the gay couple, I just call them pedophiles. They're not gay, they're pedophiles. They adopted two boys and, you know, raped them and spread them amongst their friends, you know? And this is stuff that it's a clear consequence of society giving one minority too much rope. There should have never been a point where people stopped asking valid questions of people, in particular when it comes to the adopting of children and the reproduction of children. There should have never been a point where we dropped our standards in that sense. You know, heterosexual couples, they go through so much scrutiny to adopt a child. But, you know, some of these
What kind of
predators,
scrutiny?
Well, there's probably around 40,000 or less permanent adoptions in Australia per year. It's just not many, but there's plenty of people in foster care. So, it is extraordinarily difficult to adopt children at the best of times. So,
but is that a factor of just bureaucracy and red tape, or is that just because people want to go and have their own biological kids?
There's a lot of emphasis on maintaining biological roots. So even kids that we know pretty certainty their parents aren't going to get off the drugs and become mentally stable and welcome them back into the home, they'll find themselves in permanent foster care as opposed to, a permanent adoptive family and so on and so forth. And the foster care system in particular has opened its arms to gay couples as well. So it's even more of a risk factor in terms of the transient nature of those relationships between a child and their new carers. So, the whole system is just messy, and it's broken on both sides of the fence. But my key issue is that the same-sex couples do not get as much scrutiny as the heterosexual couples do now, because everybody's afraid to offend people and to discriminate against them. But sometimes you must in order to do the job correctly.
Yeah, well, the pursuit of truth is one that is uncomfortable, and you do have to answer uncomfortable questions, and you do have to run the risk of offending people. That's offending someone isn't something to be afraid of. It's not something that you should look for, and it's not something that you should pursue. But if it's for the benefit of the truth and the benefit of redefining reality and where as a society we draw a line, I think that's absolutely important. I guess the conversation around adoption tends to be that we need more people to adopt. We need more people to get kids out of foster care, or get kids out of permanent homelessness, or get kids off the streets. That tends to be the notion that is put forward. So I would operate under the assumption that as long as you kind of get your working with kids check,
it's just a police check and they give you a plastic card.
Right.
A working with children's check does not make you qualified in any respect. It just means you've never broken the law in a significant way and you're paid for a pass. So I think, if we're going to be truthful about this, we need to acknowledge that certain lifestyles are not as compatible when it comes to raising children. So gay men are a prime example of this, and obviously it's not all gay men.
Yep.
But there is a serious issue with non-monogamy in gay lifestyle and culture, and it's one that gay men often complain about.
Just gay guys like to fuck.
Well, they do.
It is. It's the truth.
Multiple partners, different partners, their lifestyles are incompatible with raising children for that reason, because through raising those children in those environments in which there are lots of transient adults coming in and out of those households, it does put children at risk. People can say whatever they want. At the end of the day, having these risk factors is not irrelevant. And so when you're looking at bringing a child into a home, in particular a child that's experienced trauma of any kind and is looking for safety, you may not be placing them in a safe environment or an environment of which they feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. But at the same time, that possibility exists for heterosexual children of heterosexual parents as well, right? There's no qualifications to become a parent. It's a really weird thing. It's one of the most important jobs that you will ever get as a human being. It's probably the most important job you will ever have as a human being, is raising another person, and anyone can do it.
Because biology has this wonderful system that builds into a parent a sense of innate protection towards that child.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously there are exceptions to that. We live in a very broken world, and that's where you see a lot of your incests and all that stuff that goes on, right? But the normal majority, when they have a child, there is an immediate biologically driven bond at the very bare minimum between mother and child, and often a paternal bond from a biological father. These things are absent when you bring step parents of any kind into the home. And so when I'm looking at, say, a single woman who then brings in a strange man as a new partner into a home, I'm just as concerned for that child's well-being as I would be a gay couple where one is maybe a biological parent and there's a new partner that comes into the home.
I can understand that the bonding process won't be the same, but what if the biological dad was just a piece of shit? Like, what if he was just a bad guy and the step parent actually worked out to be a better fit? I mean, that happens as well. Some people, you know, sex is a reckless thing. Sex is, you know, people have unintended pregnancies all the time, and they end up splitting with their partners. Like, I know of 3 people that are within my age bracket that have had children and then split with their the biological father. And that's not to say that in 5 years' time they can't meet another person who's actually a lot more fit and a lot more qualified to fit that father role than the biological father.
Yeah, so when we look at this, it's really important to account for the fact that, you know, there is natural family breakdown and nobody's denying that, right? We know people end relationships and that fantastic step parents do come in and so on and so forth. What we're talking about when I say that, you know, I'm just as concerned when it comes to introducing adults into a child's life. What we're saying is that there should be no less vigilance between that situation where there's a step parent coming into a household in a heterosexual scenario. There should be no less vigilance when we're doing that with a gay couple, right? But there is a disproportionate amount of scrutiny. And one of the most unfortunate things in this world is that there are step parents and new partners that come in and they groom and they abuse children, right? They're not under that biological protection umbrella, right, in a lot of these households. And so it just means that there's a higher risk. It's not to say that everyone will or that anyone is going to be inherently unsafe, but what it means is that we must stay vigilant. The same way that any single woman that brings a man into her household under the same roof as her child needs to remain vigilant regardless of his character and the way that she perceives him. There must still be boundaries in place of which there's a necessary amount of supervision and trust that is built over time when you are introducing a child to an unfamiliar adult. Because predators are everywhere, and all of a sudden we have predators dressed in rainbow clothing screaming pride and waving the flag around.
Yeah.
You know, they're wolves in sheep's clothing, and it's not everyone. But I tell you what, there's a fair few out there, and it's very scary.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, whether you want to call it a mental illness, whether you want to call it just the worst parts of humanity, it does exist, and it's existed for all of human civilization. There's just some weird fucked up population that seems to be attracted towards children in a way that you and I as normal operating human beings will never be able to understand or comprehend. Like, where is the humanity in that? Where is the...
It's understandable.
Is it?
It genuinely is. So, you know, what I call the garden variety pedophiles, they find themselves in their young adulthood usually as they start to go through puberty. What they're attracted to doesn't grow up with them. So they'll still be attracted to an 8-year-old as an 8-year-old, and as they get older, to say 13,
it stops developing.
They're still attracted to that 8-year-old.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they necessarily will offend either. There are still a lot of non-offending pedophiles, right? And so in a way, I feel sorry for people that have that literal wiring problem. It's not their fault necessarily. And I think because we have also parallel to that, sexual sadists that abuse children because it gets them going, right? You've got 2 separate demographics, and one demographic ideally needs some medical research and some intervention and some psychological help, which, you know, a lot of people that do have these issues with the development of their sexuality, they would tend to seek that. Now, there's a very big difference between giving those people help and normalising them to the extent that society's trying to at the moment by calling them minor attracted persons.
Yeah, that's weird. That terminology is definitely weird.
Exactly right.
Like, hey, pedophile was a great word.
Literally.
It's strong.
It
lets you know straight away.
Exactly right. So
Can we just pause for a second? I want to
Go.
grab some water.
Yeah, go. The biggest problem I have with the entire rainbow movement is that when you seek to normalize something, what you're saying is that it's healthy and therefore acceptable and therefore should be propagated.
Yeah.
That's what it means to say something is normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not normal. Family breakdown is not normal for children, right? Having different adults swing in and out of their lives is not normal. So the ways in which we're pushing society is incompatible with the needs of children at large. And that's where I have an issue with it, you know. The goal of any parent should be to give their children the most stable possible upbringing. And no, it will not always pan out that way, and we know that. But the difference is, are you doing it intentionally or is it happening to you? You know? And to the best of your ability, as a parent, you should always be trying to protect your children from that level of instability, right? And so, you know, when people try to normalise minor attracted persons, what are we then saying about minor attracted persons?
That they're normal.
Exactly. But people have been trying to lower the age of consent. There's a lot of really crazy, gross and messed up things coming in under this agenda. And so for me, I sort of have to, I'm a logical thinker. I'm fair in the way that I think, right? And so where I think there are people that have genuinely been born with a mental defect that stops what they're attracted to from progressing, they need help, but they don't need to be normalised.
Mm-hmm. Just as the same way you wouldn't normalise schizophrenia in schools or any other, you know, thing that makes you different, right?
You know, and they may need help, but it doesn't mean that they need to be publicly tarred and feathered either.
Yeah.
Like, I think if people come, you know, to a therapist for help and they say, you know, this is something that's going on, I'm not a risk to anyone, but I do need help. You know, I would like to see people study, you know, pedophiles. I'd love to see them actually find practical solutions to reverse that defect in their mind that does not progress what they're attracted to. That would be fantastic to see.
The pursuit of truth has to be uncomfortable. Listen, you've got elections coming up soon. How can the people support?
Yeah, we will.
So best of luck for this weekend. If people do want to tune into your amazing meme content, your YouTube, your Instagram, your Twitter, everything that you've got going on, how can they do so?
Yeah, so you can just Google Millie Fontana. You'll find me under Millie New South Wales on most platforms. And if you want to find me at the ballot box, I'm in Group J, the Liberal Democrats. We are directly next to the Liberals and the Nationals in the upper house. And we're to the right of them, which is where they should be on policy.
Millie, thank you so much for coming out, sharing all your thoughts. And again, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. It was fun.